Good day, everyone, and welcome to the February 3rd, 2021 edition of the Med Safety Exchange. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Mike Hamilton. I'm Medical Director at ISMP Canada, and this webinar is a production of ISMP Canada and CMERPS with contributions from really all of our partners in medication safety and you, the audience. So the main purpose of this webinar series is to encourage reporting, sharing, and learning regarding medication incidents and medication safety topics to bridge the silos in healthcare and to optimize safety in all care sites. And we do this really so that we can learn from each other. This will be our second Med Safety Exchange on the Zoom webinar platform, and we're still learning a bit, but the response so far has been very positive. A few reminders that will help optimize your viewing and participation. You have to register before the webinar begins, but you can log on any time. You must use the computer audio. Please adjust your volume to a sufficiently loud setting, and you're automatically muted as an audience member. And it's also helpful to maximize the size of the Zoom window in order to better see the slides, and all your cameras are disabled. The presentation part of this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website in about 2 weeks or so. And again, once again, I will be in control of the slides, so you'll hear the presenters pushing those forward. To submit questions, I know some of you have already, please find the Q&A toolbar at the bottom. It looks something like this, or it might be at the top. There's a chat function which is disabled. There's a raise hand function which is either disabled or we'll ignore it. Please submit all your questions via the Q&A panel. And this is sort of what it looks like. You're certainly welcome to send these anonymously. And for questions that we don't get to or we're unable to answer, please feel free to submit them by our medsafetyexchange@ismpcanada.ca email account. For this session, we'll mainly answer via the Q&A process, but in the future, we may decide to have a running chat. And now for today's overview, this webinar will hear about really an extensive undertaking to enhance safety through the implementation of IV smart pumps and a provincially standardized drug library. And we'll also learn of an approach to understanding our own collections of data and putting that data to work using Pareto Analysis. And you will have previously heard about our Neverevent MSSA produced in conjunction with CPSI. And we're very pleased to present a few highlights of our national snapshot. And we'll finish by visiting the Observatory, where we'll hear some very quick updates from our own analysis team. And we understand that standardization is a really effective tool in our safety improvement arsenal, but it must be done thoughtfully. And I'd like to welcome our first presenter who will be speaking to us about the province's implementation of a standardized drug library and all the work that was part of that. So Rebecca, please unmute yourself and just tell me when to advance the slides.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Campbell, and I'm a pharmacist at Health PEI. Today, I'm going to tell you about a project I worked on in 2019, the implementation of IV smart pumps with a provincially standardized drug library. Next slide, please. I have no conflicts to declare. Next slide. Some of the things I'd like to accomplish with this presentation are, first, to describe smart infusion pumps and dose error reduction software. I also want to describe the implementation project and highlight the work that went into that, including things to keep in mind and some challenges we met along the way. And at the end, I'll cover some future aspirations with respect to improving parenteral therapy safety. In the next slide, I'll describe the difference between traditional IV pumps and smart IV pumps. So traditional IV pumps were introduced in the 70s, and they're programmable by volume and rate. They have a high potential for programming errors, which have contributed to a large number of adverse events over the years. Smart pumps have programmed drug libraries that can be customized to the patient population being treated. Pumps can be programmed in dose rate, for example, milligrams per kilogram per hour, or volume rate, mils per hour. There are Accreditation Canada standards around the use of IV smart pumps and maintaining competency in their use. Smart pumps include dose error reduction software, which I'll describe in the next slide. Dose error reduction software, or DERS, will alert the user if the drug dose or rate are outside the usual limits. Each care area has its own profile containing only the medications used in that area, with concentrations and limits appropriate for patients within that area. Newer pumps have bidirectional wireless technology, which allows for each pump to be updated remotely and for the transfer of usage data back to a server for monitoring. Next slide. At the time of implementation, the 2018-2019 ISMP Targeted Medication Safety Best Practices had been released. Best practice number 8 stated that high alert IV medications should be administered via programmable infusion pumps using dose error reduction software. The plan for our implementation was to have all IV medications and fluids that were administered via IV pumps to be administered using DERS. In the next slide, I'll briefly describe Health PEI. So Health PEI has 2 main referral hospitals, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and Prince County Hospital. We also have 2 smaller community hospitals at each end of the province and the Provincial Palliative Care Center in Charlottetown. Inpatient and outpatient services, as well as the patient population served, vary from site to site. In the next slide, I'll begin to describe the project. So the goal of the project was to implement IV smart pumps with DERS across all Health PEI sites and introduce standardized best practices in infusion therapy with a provincially standardized reference drug library. I was brought into the project in January of 2019 after the RFP process had completed. Nova Scotia had purchased the same pumps as PEI, and they had recommended having a full-time nurse in addition to a pharmacist dedicated to the writing of the drug library. Having a full-time collaboration between a pharmacist, myself, and a nurse, Allison Pearson, an OR nurse, was instrumental to the overall success of the project. We also acted as project managers and had hands-on knowledge of all aspects of the project. On the next slide, you'll see that we had several working groups dedicated to the project. In addition to the project co-leads, the drug library working group included the vendor, IV manual pharmacist, and representation from nursing. Clinical pharmacists from ICU, pediatrics and neonatal, and oncology also contributed their expertise to the build. Each care area had a working group, including nurses from various practice sites across the province, in order to ensure the individual needs of all sites were represented. In the next slide, I discuss other stakeholders. So internal stakeholders included infection prevention and control, housekeeping, and materials management. External stakeholders included Island EMS and the university for the RN program and the colleges for the LPN and paramedicine programs. It was important to keep communication open between the implementation committee and stakeholders. One issue we ran into was a misunderstanding on our go-live dates with EMS. This resulted in a last-minute scrambling to ensure a safe workflow was available for patients transferring between sites during the phased implementation. Next slide, please. We were very fortunate in PEI that a lot of provincial standardization work had already taken place in preparation for the implementation of CPOE in 2013. Prior to that, there were different formularies, different IV manuals, different pre-printed orders, and different policies. Having much of this work completed made it much easier to write a provincial drug library that would work for everyone. Many of the clinicians involved in the project had also been involved in prior standardization work, so change management was less of an issue. One area that still required standardization was clinical workflow, which I'll begin to describe in the next slide. There remained a lot of variability in IV therapy practices, in particular between East and West. A lot of that was attributed to the 2 different volumetric pumps that were in use. The two pumps used in the East and West had quite different functionality, which I'll get into in a later slide. Next slide, please. Prior to the project, the vendor completed a very comprehensive infusion assessment where they visited every site and observed and interviewed staff to identify areas where there were deviations from best practice and inconsistencies between sites. This was an invaluable tool in helping to guide the project. There was a high level of cooperation among staff with regard to the standardization of practices and preparation of educational materials and resources to support the new IV pumps and drug library. Within the Health PEI IV manual, the IV quick reference chart was expanded to include more medications with mixing instructions for both the volumetric and syringe pumps. The critical care medication infusion chart was also expanded and updated. Ranges for mixing were eliminated. For example, 50 ml mini bags were defaulted for any intermittent medications that had a range of 50 to 100 mils. In the next slide, I'll discuss different delivery methods. The pumps in Western PEI, which were very popular, had concurrent flow, which means they could infuse two different fluids at the same time through the same tubing. This method ensures the entire intermittent volume is delivered and it detects if the secondary line is clamped. However, it results in a shared infusion volume, which should be minimized. The pumps in Eastern PEI, as well as the new IV Smart pumps, use head height differential to administer secondary medications. The secondary fluid is hung higher than the primary fluid. Once the fluid in the secondary bag reaches the height of the primary fluid, the pump begins to draw from the primary bag. However, if the user forgets to unclamp the secondary line, the medication won't infuse and there is no alert provided. This difference was highlighted early on as a potential challenge for Western PEI, where refresher training would be required on head height differential and the importance of remembering to open the clamp on the secondary line. On the next slide, I'll cover primary and secondary infusions. So primary infusions are given via a primary IV set with the tubing running through the pump. Primary infusions are often used for IV fluids and continuous infusions, but they can also be used for intermittent infusions. Many intermittent medications are given as secondary infusions, which are connected onto a primary line at the upper injection port. We were able to configure the pump software to prevent the connection of secondary IV infusions to high alert primary infusions, which can result in interruption of therapy. There was inconsistency even within departments on whether or not intermittent medications were administered as primary or secondary infusions. The use of secondary infusions for intermittent medications helps ensure delivery of the complete dose without the requirement to open the system to flush the line. Whenever appropriate, intermittent medications were built in the drug library to be administered as secondary medications only. In the next two slides, I'll describe volumetric and syringe pumps. The new IV pumps came in both styles, which was very practical from a training perspective, as they have many similar features. It was hoped that the two pumps being so similar would increase the uptake in the use of syringe pumps. Volumetric pumps are generally used to deliver large volumes of fluids at medium to high flow rates. In the next slide, I'll describe when you might prefer to use a syringe pump. When giving continuous infusions, syringe pumps are ideal for low flow, low volume infusions. At low flow rates, less than 7.5 mils per hour, the syringe pump is more precise than the volumetric pump. For this reason, it would be ideal to administer many critical care infusions via a syringe pump. However, criteria such as frequency of syringe changes and drug stability also need to be considered. As our IV manual contained instructions to mix all of our adult continuous infusions in mini bags, and we had not purchased enough syringe pumps to make the switch, it was decided to put the move to syringe pumps for adult critical care infusions on the back burner. For intermittent infusions, syringe pumps can deliver at high flow rates, but are limited to smaller volumes. In the next slide, I'll show some of the references we consulted. As you can see, there are many resources and references available when writing a drug library. These were consulted to ensure we are in compliance with accreditation standards and best practices. All entries in the drug library were referenced. The Nova Scotia Health Authority deserves a huge thank you for sharing their draft drug library with us and keeping us informed of any issues they ran into along the way. We were very fortunate to have them to collaborate with on this project. Next slide, please. Efforts were made to take a consistent approach to the drug library build itself. We took care to ensure the display names in the library matched the way it appeared in our Clinical Information System, CERNR, and ISMP Canada's list of tall man letters. We standardized the default and max volume to be infused for secondary infusions as the bag volume plus overfill plus extra for drug volume to ensure delivery of the entire dose. We standardized the default and max volume to be infused for primary infusions as the bag size to ensure consistent drug concentrations from bag to bag. We use consistent wording in our clinical advisories, which are messages that appear when the drug is selected on the pump. We also tried to take a consistent approach to setting soft and hard limits. On the next slide, I outline some of the steps involved in writing the library. So the first step was to create a master list of all IV medications and fluids and health PEI's formulary. Then we had to determine which medications to include in the library and which to include in each care area's profile. The software had a limit on the number of profiles, how many therapies per profile, and the number of dilutions per drug. We also had to consider how to enter the display name. We wanted it to match Cerner and the IV manual as closely as possible, but we also had character limits to keep in mind. The next slide shows a screenshot of the drug library software. So the 200 therapy per profile limit meant we had to get creative. We created 3 separate profiles for critical care, one for the volumetric pump, one for the syringe pump, and one for the antidote library. Having a separate antidote library had the added benefit of reducing the risk of selection error. Next slide, please. We went over each medication to determine the different indications, dilutions, and dosing regimens we needed to build. We tried to take as consistent an approach as possible when it came to building the different dilutions, which can be built as completely separate therapies or they can be nested under therapies. Dilutions can also be built as either fixed or variable options depending on how they're ordered. We also had to consider what order to put the therapies and dilutions in. We worked with nursing staff to determine what would be safest while also being most intuitive. In the next slide, I show an example. Here you can see 3 different therapies for one medication, all to place. The nurse chooses which therapy to use based on the name, so the names need to be clear and intuitive. Character limits sometimes made this tricky. Next slide, please. Once we decided which drugs to include and how to display them, we had to set soft and hard limits, which I explain on the next slide. The range within soft limits represents what is typically seen in day-to-day practice. When a soft limit is reached and passed, the pump emits a sound and displays a warning on the screen. To override the limit, the nurse must acknowledge the alert. Hard limits cannot be overridden. There was some apprehension around setting some hard limits, especially for titratable infusions like opioids, because there are sometimes atypical cases. Hard limits are meant to detect programming errors as opposed to guide dosing. So we needed to guide the safety benefits of operating within DERs versus the risk of programming infusions outside of DERs for one-off or rare scenarios. Guidance on how staff are to manage soft and hard limits was included in the new IV Smart Pump policy. In the next slide, I show an example. The dopamine build for the adult critical care library shows 2 dilutions are available, with the more common one appearing first in the list. The clinical advisory is presented once when the therapy is chosen. The default rate is set to a typical starting rate of 2 mics per kilogram per minute. The rate can be titrated anywhere between 0.5 and 20 mics per kilogram per minute without generating any alerts. Above or below those parameters, the pump will alert that the user is operating outside the soft limits. The pump will not allow the user to program the rate above the hard limit of 50 mics per kilogram per minute. Next slide, please. The next thing we had to do was determine and set the pump configurations, which I get into on the next slide. These are just a few of the configurations we were able to set for the new pumps. This was challenging because pump configurations had previously been exclusively programmed by Biomed and were comparably basic. These pumps are highly customizable, and most clinicians had not considered things like occlusion pressure and bubble sizes before. Appropriate settings vary between different care areas and patient populations. Overtime alert and alarm rates can be reviewed and the settings adjusted to optimize the configuration settings to minimize nuisance alarms, while still detecting issues that require intervention. On the next slide, I show how we approached one of the end of infusion settings, KVO. After the program volume has been infused, common practice over the years has been to have the pump alert and switch to a KVO or keep vein open rate to give the nurse time to mix the next bag. However, the Infusion Nurses Society standards of practice state that a patient-specific order is required to set an infusion rate for any infusion. Abruptly changing the rate of an infusion, particularly a high alert titratable medication like norepinephrine, can have detrimental effects on the patient. For this reason, the use of KVO rate at the end of an infusion was eliminated across the province. Next slide, please. The standardization of IV sets and the elimination of many extension sets allowed us to decrease line items and reduce the risk of error. The mini bag shortage a few years ago had highlighted that there were varied levels of confidence with giving IV push medications from site to site and even within units. A new provincial IV push education module based on ISMP guidelines and an IV push rate quick reference chart were created and provided to nurses. A new provincial IV smart pump policy was created, and all site-specific and provincial infusion-related policies in the province were reviewed and recommendations were made to update several of them. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, the pharmacist and RN positions were temporary project positions, and there has been nobody formally in those roles in the past several months. Permanent positions are required for ongoing monitoring and maintenance of the drug library and for monitoring of the CQI data and medication incidents. The creation and posting of these positions was slowed down by COVID, but the positions should be posted any day now. Other outstanding items include a review of the adult critical care infusions to see which should be given via syringe pump. We also still use different ambulatory smart PCA pumps between Eastern and Western PEI. And down the road, it would be ideal to look at interoperability of the smart pumps with the electronic health record. Next slide. The 2020-2021 ISMP Targeted Medication Safety Best Practices list has since been released, and best practice number 8 has been revised to focus on ongoing monitoring, maintenance, and updating of the drug library. The goal is to maintain at least 95% compliance with DERS. Health PEI has consistently been at greater than 98% compliance with DERS since go live, which is a testament to the great participation and collaboration we have from the care area working groups and validation teams who provided valuable input into the build. And the next slide just shows my references. And I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to present our project on the Med Safety Exchange. It has been my pleasure to share our project with you here today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's our pleasure to learn from you, and I'm really impressed by the complexity of the enterprise and the amount of background work you need to do to begin this. And I think that's one of the key learning points I pulled out of this. Another key learning point, I think, is that standardizing in one area leads to opportunities in other places, like flow rates and other drug libraries. So enormous work. So I hope we can take these back to our own organizations and maybe sort of think about, do we have standardized facility-wide IV smart pump libraries, or is it sort of care specific? Are they up to date? And if you've standardized in some areas, are you reviewing some of that CQI data, the override data, the error data that's provided by the pumps, and sort of embarking yourself on continuous learning? So thank you so much for that. I'll now move to our second presentation here about Pareto analysis. And our reporting systems are very good at collecting incident data, but it's still sort of up to us to turn that data into opportunities for improvement. And in the next segment, we'll learn about a tool to help us make sense of our data and give us some direction on how to proceed. Our next presenter cannot join us live today, but was gracious enough to pre-record the seminar. So I will advance this slide, and we will watch his presentation in full.
My name is Jignesh Padia. I'm a biochemical engineer by training and have several years of experience in designing, improving, and utilizing incident reporting systems, be it a paper-based or electronic. Since this is a recorded webinar, please direct your questions to Mike Hamilton or to the email that will be shared at the end of this presentation. And Mike or I will be happy to get back to you. It is my utmost pleasure to be with you today virtually to share something that I'm very passionate about, which is improving patient safety using quality improvement tools. And one in particular that we'll be talking today is Pareto analysis. I'm sure many of you may have heard of Pareto analysis or Pareto tool or may have even used it to some great extent. If you're very familiar with it and have used it, I will be very happy to also hear from you your success stories. So let's jump in. Idea in brief. This is kind of an elevator speech of what this tool is about and what's so good about it. Of course, we won't be using a tool if it doesn't have any benefit or it solves any problem. So what's the problem? Well, these days, we have a lot of data. And when we talk about incident reports, we seem to have seemingly large amount of incident reports being submitted by our staff members across organizations. And they often come in a very discrete and seemingly unrelated scenarios or situations. And what that does is it makes it very hard for managers and senior leadership to identify the key issues. And often managers and process owners continue to tackle these problems one by one in isolation and sometimes random, it seems, without realizing how to effectively prioritize the most important aspect, a theme that can result in the highest benefit. So again, the end goal is to have a maximum benefit in terms of safety improvement for patients, staff, by focusing on the issues that are vital and critical and not too many. So that leads us to a solution, which is Pareto Analysis. So Pareto Analysis is a data-driven tool. It clearly uses the frequencies and counts of different incidents or categories of incidents and helps identifying in the most important issues that one can or should focus on. It provides an opportunity to focus on the use of limited resources to gain the maximum benefits. So imagine if you have thousands of incident reports, which one are you going to prioritize? If you do a Pareto analysis and if you find that, well, there are 5 key areas that are resulting in multiple incidents for 80%, so to say, that's probably where you might want to focus your energy. So is there a research backing this up? The good news is there is a lot of research done on this. To give you some quick taste of it, here are some examples. So there was an article published in 2014, Application of Pareto Principle to Identify and Address Drug Therapy Safety Issues in European Journal of Clinical Pharmacology. There was also a BMJ article in 2017, Improving Monitoring of Diabetic Complications in Home Care Patients. Also, if you Google National Health Services UK, NHS UK, or IHI, Institute for Healthcare Improvement, you will find lots of resources and evidence on use of this tool. Of course, this tool is not supposed to be used in isolation. It does need a framework and support from other tools and techniques that most of you are probably familiar with. And I'll explain a few as a summary. So let's talk if Pareto Analysis is the right tool for you. So here are some questions to consider. Do you feel that there are too many safety issues at hand and it's difficult to decide where to start? If you answered yes, of course, Pareto Analysis is the tool for you then. Do you think that your efforts are not having as much impact as they should? Or perhaps you're not able to document or demonstrate to your senior leadership team or to your team members that the solutions that you're trying are impactful. The last one, are you looking for an easy to use tool that can help you with a data-driven decision making at senior leadership level as well as at the middle management or below? If that is the case, Pareto analysis is a very easy to use tool that can really help see the trends and identify solutions for you. So going into the Pareto principle itself, well, it was developed by an economist named Wilfredo Pareto. It is a decision-making tool. And how Wilfred Pareto came about this principle was he was studying the wealth of Italy, and what he found was that 20% of the people owned 80% of the wealth. And then he went on and kind of trialed this again with other countries and found the same thing, that in many sectors, many countries, in many fields, he felt that this rule was true, where 20% of people or 20% of the causes were giving 80% of the effects or results. And that's why it's also known as 80-20 rule. And now you may wonder, like, Jignesh, does it always have to be 80-20? Well, the general answer is it's always about that. Sometimes it could be 70-30, 60-40. Does that make a difference? Well, the big thing is that you will be able to separate out the majority of the issues by what we call principle of vital few. So again, 20% of the causes are responsible for 80% of the effects. So if you tackle those 20%, you can improve what you're trying to do. So how do you apply this? Well, you can use Pareto principle to identify the problem. So if you happen to get lots of incidents and you don't know and if you're interested in understanding what is your number one drug that is often becoming an issue. So again, you are trying to identify that number one problem drug. Well, you then identify drug as a category, drug name, and use your incident reports frequencies and do the Pareto analysis, tabulate it, and voila, you will get your answer in terms of which drugs or a drug in particular is causing you the most number of incidents. Again, measuring the extent of the problem. So again, if you do this type of Pareto analysis, you will be able to identify that drug A is resulting in X percentage of issues versus drug B, which is resulting in Y percentage of issues. You can also use this to identify possible causes as well as solutions. So again, the principle remains true. You can apply that in either way. So let's look at some examples, real world examples. So 80% of the IT companies in Scotland are located in 20% of the cities. A 2002 report from Microsoft found that 80% of the errors are caused by 20% of the bugs. 80% of the inventory comes from 20% of suppliers. 20% of patient causes 80% of the healthcare resource drop. 20% of your grocery items amount for 80% of the bill. Now that one you might want to check. I did try that a few times, and it does vary. So depending on your shopping habits and what are you getting. 20% of the people in your life consume 80% of your time. I think that's very true. So if we do a Pareto analysis of incident reports, what are we looking for? Well, Pareto analysis, as I said, is a visual tool. It can help you focus by identifying, the big issues that you're looking for. So problems that offer the greatest potential for improvement. So on this slide, what you can see here is different lengths of bars. So again, the tallest bars are what we're looking for. And again, when it when the total cumulative sum of those tallest bar goes up to 80, we stop there and then look for those categories that are contributing to that 80%. So here is a better picture of that. And again, it talks about the principle of vital few against trivial many. So again, if you have thousands of incidents, right, you can let go these trivial many and focus on the vital few that are causing the 80% of the issues in terms of frequency. So here are some, again, real world examples of how I have used this, and maybe you have, and you can use this principle to understand and tease out some details. So what does a reporting culture of an organization look like? So when we did this Pareto analysis for the reported incidents by, the staff member who discovered it and reported it, congratulations to our pharmacy folks or pharmacists. We found almost 76% of the time it was a pharmacist staff member who reported the incident. Again, the culture may vary from organization to organization. So this is one way of doing it. And depending on your sample size and the incident report from year to year may also change. So stages involved, again, as you all know, like processes, we have prescribing, dispensing, administrating, all those different processes. So if you try to break those down and collect information from the incident reports and tabulate your Pareto analysis, you may find different results, but in some examples that I have worked on, we found that 53% of the time prescribing was an issue, and henceforth, why CPOE, computerized physician order entry, is a great tool or a solution to use. Of course, it's not free of error because you can expedite errors through CPOE as well, and it may still remain the highest contributing factor in terms of prescribing issues. Well, you can also do drill down. So, if you have a large amount of data, you can drill down. So, for example, in the previous slide, we looked at the prescribing as a number one category. You can then drill down on prescribing and see under prescribing process, what type of issues are we seeing? And so here is an example of that. And what you can see is like 40% of the issues are coming from incorrect dose. So again, you might wonder, okay, what is going on with our prescribing process that is causing incorrect doses? And what type of incorrect doses are we seeing? Again, the second biggest factor is incorrect drugs. So again, what drugs are being prescribed incorrectly? And so on. Again, you can do a Pareto chart of incidents in terms of incorrect dose, incorrect drug by themselves, and then drill down in terms of, okay, if we are looking at the incorrect dose, where are the incorrect doses coming from? And again, this is kind of validating, and when we do that, we find that, hey, it is coming from the prescribing process. So some examples of actual incidents that we had found. So Rituxan 100 milligram versus 1,000. Again, so you can zoom into those particular incidents and try to tease out what are you seeing. And lastly, I want to mention, like, you can also use the Pareto chart to understand, your patient harm situation. Analysis such as this can tell you what percentage of patients are receiving errors and they're reaching to them. So if you tabulate all of the IMP patient harm categories, so again, you're probably familiar, it goes from no error to death. So if you do that, you may be able to then tabulate, like, okay, what percentage of your reported errors are resulting and or reaching in some fashion to the patient. So in this particular example, about 27 or 28% of the errors we're reaching. That's what we're showing here. So, okay, now you know that you have a problem. What do you do with that? And so this is where, again, I'm coming back to my original thing about, like, just Pareto itself is not going to help you. You need to have a framework. So again, one example framework I would like to propose here is model for improvement, right? What are you trying to accomplish? How will we know that the change is an improvement? And what can we make? What change can we make that will result in improvement? So again, going through that PDSA, plan, do, study, act cycle. So you can use the Pareto analysis and say, okay, we are receiving 80% of the, we are seeing 80% of prescribing issues. So you can come up with an aim or a goal statement. We want to reduce that to 50%. So 30% decrease by when? Maybe in 6 months. Okay, then you can go into measurement. So what are you going to measure as a process? So again, type of prescribing orders that are found to be defect-free. And in terms of outcome, again, how many med errors we have reduced. Changes, again, plan, do, study, act cycle. What are you going to do in terms of verifying that you are getting the outcome that you're hoping for? And as you probably know well by working in healthcare, is like it's not an individual sport, it's a teamwork effort. So to get through this improvement cycle, you do need to enlist change agents across the organization, and you may even want to use some other tools. And here is another example of a tool like a fishbone diagram. So you can do a fishbone diagram on wrong patient receiving medication. So what are different factors, procedure, policy, staff, equipment. Of course, to do a good job of explaining what the fishbone is, it may take another webinar, maybe it's for some other time. But the idea here is that you can enlist various tools as part of your team and integrate into your model of improvement. That's where, again, the Pareto analysis will give you the head start, the beginning, and also the end in terms of, have you really made the difference, to validate your process improvement efforts. So that I'll close with a wonderful quote from Leonardo da Vinci. He said that, I have been impressed with the urgency of doing. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Being willing is not enough. We must do. So I leave you with this wonderful quote, and good luck to all of you on your improvement journey. And thank you once again for listening to this. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop me a note. I can be reached at jignesh.padya@gmail.com.
Thanks so much, Jignesh. And there is a lot of information in that presentation, but I think that we're often called upon to try and convince people that our initiative in medication safety is important. And I think that Pareto analysis is one of those tools we can use to really lend some rigor and some true analysis to what we're asking for. And so I'd just like you to sort of think of the strategies you use to make sense of your own incident data, and how do you as an organization set priorities, and even go so far as take some of your incident data and do a Pareto analysis on it, and tell us what you've learned, and has it been any different for you. And so for our last segment, we'd like to turn things over to Julie Greenall from ISMP Canada, who she leads a lot of our self-assessment work and is very pleased to update everyone on the most recent MSSA.
Thanks very much, Mike, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here to talk to you about what we learned from our national snapshot from our Never Events assessments. And I'd like to thank the Canadian Patient Safety Institute for their support in developing these assessment tools. We now have one for acute care, long-term care, and we are going to be in the spring launching one for community pharmacy. I'd also really like to thank all the hospitals and long-term care homes that participated despite everything else that they were doing managing COVID on the front lines. So I can have the next slide, please, Mike. So first of all, what is Neverevent? So Neverevent really is the most critical kind of incident that we can have. And it's an incident that we know about already, that we know can cause severe harm to a patient or has the potential to do so. And we also know that it's preventable, either by the healthcare professional, by the team, or by the organization. Next slide, please. So really our goal with these assessments was to focus on critical situations with medications for which we knew there were safety strategies available. And we had, for hospitals, we had 27 sites who participated. We had many more who registered, and I think we had 108 sites register, and they may not have completed the whole assessment, but we know that they're considering it, which is really terrific. So 27 sites submitted from 6 provinces, the biggest group from Ontario, but we're really happy to see that national representation. And then I'm just going to very quickly highlight some things that we learned. And so there was a study done by Health Quality Ontario with the Canadian Patient Safety Institute, where they identified some specific pharmaceutical never events. And we included these in the very first section of this assessment. And so these are the results for those. So the one with the highest level of full implementation was vincristine, always dispensed in a mini bag. And this is to prevent inadvertent intrathecal administration, which is universally fatal. Medication orders always screen against validated allergies. This is an area that we know is a continuous challenge, and we can see from the results that there's more work to be done in this area. Another area we've highlighted is the need for medications intended for topical use to never be placed into a syringe. And so you can see that there's still, while there is uptake, there's still opportunity. And these are only the sites that reported fully implemented, so I did not report back on the partial implementations. Concentrated electrolytes not available in patient care areas. To say I was a little surprised to see that one not higher. We know there's been a lot of work done with potassium chloride and probably still some gaps related to other concentrated electrolytes. And then related to the administration of vincristine, there should always be confirmation that any intrathecal medications have been given before vincristine is dispensed. Paralyzing agents should only be available in critical care areas and segregated from other medications, so that we had 50% full implementation reported. And then the last one, high dose, high concentration opioids not available in ward stock. So they could be brought into a unit for a particular patient, but they shouldn't be routinely stocked there. So next slide, please, Mike. And then some areas where we did see really good evidence of success. And I think on the ISMP Canada side, really nice to see that a lot of these are related to various campaigns that we've done over the years. So, mix-ups between 5% sodium chloride and 5% dextrose. So 100% of hospitals responding that this question was applicable indicated that they do not actually stock 5% sodium chloride in their hospitals. Very high percentage of hospitals who've established do not use lists and lists of high alert medications with associated safeguards. Assessment items related to safe use of epidurals got very high scores, and then high scores for standardized concentrations of insulin and for opioids. And then I did want to just note this last one about computer order entry systems default to a weekly rather than daily dosage regimen for methotrexate for non-oncologic indications. So hospitals reported this as 65%. Most hospitals do have the ability to modify their computer software systems to make this happen. So this is a call to action to the remainder of hospitals to really get this done. It's a bigger challenge in community pharmacy where they don't have that flexibility within their systems. And then some selected opportunities. One of the things that when we were developing this assessment, we did a literature search and looked at global patient safety alerts, and we found a fatality that had happened because a patient who was being transported with a portable oxygen tank was actually hooked up to an empty tank. And so oxygen is one of those things that we use all through hospitals, but it may not really receive the attention it needs as a therapy. And so we added an item related to independently checking the oxygen level in portable equipment before it's attached. Opportunity related to standardized processes to track the use of reversal agents. And this is one way that you can detect medication incidents that have occurred. Really important for patients being discharged on anticoagulants that there's a clear plan for how long they should be taking it. Do they need any laboratory testing and so on? And then the last one I wanted to highlight was an opportunity related to verifying that patients are opioid tolerant before any long-acting opioids are dispensed. And then I'm very, very quickly going to just highlight some things from the long-term care group. So we had 44 long-term care participants across the country, and we know that long-term care homes have been particularly challenged during COVID. So I really want to thank those people who submitted these assessments. And we had really high numbers. The only two Neverevents from the Health Quality Ontario and CPSI study that were really relevant was screening medication orders against validated allergies and high dose, high concentrated opioids not available in ward stock, both over 90% fully implemented. And then I did want to highlight that the long-term care inquiry in Ontario, one of the action items, and that's now mandatory in Ontario, is a standardized process to track the use of reversal agents and antidotes. And 45% of the sites responding indicated that they have implemented this. And so I think that that's another opportunity that we will anticipate will be increasing over the next couple of years. And then some selected successes. Transdermal opioid patches are really well managed in long-term care. Identification of oral anti-cancer drugs so that nurses are aware that they may need PPE with these drugs, and also really high implementation of ensuring all of these pieces related to anticoagulants are in place for patients coming back into long-term care or initially coming into long-term care. And then lastly, some opportunities. One of the opportunities we identified for long-term care is the use of computerized prescriber order entry systems, and then also use of validated standardized sedation scales to assess or provide opportunity to detect sedation with opioids. And then here again, the management of trying to reduce errors with inadvertent daily administration of methotrexate for non-oncologic indications. And as I said, that I know this is a challenge in pharmacy, community pharmacy computer systems. So, so that's a hurdle that needs to be gotten over to achieve this. And then lastly, just wanted to share with you that we received really positive evaluation results, very high ratings in terms of the usefulness of the assessment, and most organizations planning to do some follow-up action and also planning to consider how they would incorporate this into their quality improvement planning and assessment processes, and also really high numbers on whether they would probably or definitely recommend it to a colleague in another organization. And lastly, I would just like to let you know that these assessments continue to be available. We will be continuing to monitor the results and report back on them. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Julie. Lots of interesting learning there, and we'll just spend a few moments. Again, we've heard a lot from a lot of you about your experiences with COVID-19, with treatments, with changes in practice due to the pandemic, starting to see some incidents related to immunizations. Please continue to submit them. We do have a COVID-19 vaccination bulletin coming out shortly. We will continue to learn throughout the next year about these processes, so please, we do want to hear from you about them. We'd also like to say thank you for spending the hour with us. We've had some terrific learning today, and we again are on this journey together to improve medication safety. So thank you again for learning with us, and please let us know what you think. Our email is there. If you have any questions, let us know. And we do want everyone to be part of the Med Safety Exchange. So if you do have a topic you'd love to present, please let us know. We're always looking for great material from everyone. And please don't forget to fill out our poll, which will be up shortly. And our next Med Safety Exchange is going to be in May 2021. Please keep connected so we can let you know when a date is finalized. So again, I want you all to have a wonderful day. So thank you.